what happened to her. It was despicable. It's still despicable.
How do you plead, Mr. Bowles?
Guilty.
Do not agree with the deal, with the plea that has been made today. I can't believe you let that happen to my child. I can't believe you just stood there and did nothing.
Maya Fuller is 22 years old, and she is folded into the trunk of a car, built for luggage, not for a person. Her ribs are already broken. In less than an hour, one of the 3 people driving her through the dark will shoot her 7 times and leave her on a stretch of undeveloped land she has never seen before. She doesn't know that yet. She only knows the metal pressing in around her, the road noise, and the fact that 12 hours ago, not one of these 3 people was anyone to her at all. That's the part that should stop you cold. Not the gun waiting at the end of this drive, not even the trunk. The 12 hours. Welcome to Homicide Retold. Today's case is Maya Fuller. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Before any of this, Maya Fuller was 22 and living in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a college town roughly 30 minutes outside Nashville. People who knew her describe someone sharp. Her own mother has said, in open court, that Maya was a genius, and meant it literally, not as a grief-softened compliment. She stayed close with her family. She kept in touch consistently, the kind of daughter whose silence would register as wrong almost immediately, rather than something that could plausibly wait a day or two. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should, because it's the detail that would eventually tell her family something was wrong before there was any proof of it. Nothing in her life at 22 suggested she was heading toward tragedy. She was building toward the ordinary things instead. Steady work, closeness with the people who loved her, a week-by-week life that never makes headlines because it isn't supposed to. Her family has since described her, in court and in public statements, as tender-hearted and kind, someone with a bright future, genuinely ahead of her, rather than a phrase reached for after the fact. On the Friday before, she spent time with her family. Nothing unusual about the visit, nothing anyone in that house would later flag as a final goodbye, except that it was. The next day, a Saturday, she worked an event at Geodis Park, home stadium of Nashville SC, clocking in like any other shift, doing her job, clocking out. Ordinary is the word that keeps surfacing in every account of her final weekend. Unremarkable, the kind of Saturday nobody remembers unless something forces them to. Nobody had a reason to remember it yet at the time, not that night. Because while Maya worked her shift, somebody else was already looking for her. Not calling, not asking a mutual friend who she was. Searching, scrolling a stranger's profile, gathering enough about her life to make first contact feel natural, so that when the message finally arrived, it would read like an invitation and not like what it actually was. She had no idea. There was no reason she would. A 22-year-old finishing a shift at a stadium has no cause to suspect that somewhere else in the city, a stranger is studying her page and quietly deciding how to approach her. The night before, Maya had crossed paths with a woman named Tiana Tipton, 21, from Nashville. What exactly passed between them has never been laid out in detail in any courtroom, and honestly, the specifics matter less than what came after. It was a disagreement, words exchanged between near strangers, the kind that happens dozens of times a night in every city, every weekend, and is usually forgotten by morning. For Maya, it was forgotten by morning. She went home, she got up, she went to work the next day like nothing had happened, because as far as she knew, nothing had. A brief argument with someone she barely knew. Over the moment she walked away from it. Nothing in the record suggests she thought about Tiana Tipton again, not once, for the rest of that Saturday. For Tipton, it wasn't forgotten. It followed her home, and by the next day, prosecutors say, it had hardened into something else entirely. Not anger anymore, but a decision, deliberate enough to require planning, rather than an outburst. And the decision came with an obstacle. Maya already knew her face. If Tipton approached directly, Maya would see it coming and be on guard. So Tipton didn't approach her. She went to someone who could walk up to Maya, looking completely harmless, a person Maya had never met, with no reason to be recognized as any kind of threat. Tyshawn Bowles was 20, Tipton's younger brother. According to prosecutors, he already knew about the disagreement. He knew his sister wanted a confrontation, and knowing that, he opened social media and started searching. He found her, not through a mutual connection, not through someone who could vouch for who she was, but by scrolling until her profile turned up, a young woman he had never met, who had done nothing to him, studied closely enough to approach convincingly. According to accounts from the plea hearing, he didn't stop at simply finding her. He shared what he'd found with others, identifying her as the woman involved in the dispute with his sister the day before, building a picture of who she was before he ever said a single word to her directly. It was a deliberate act of identification, carried out in daylight, hours before anything else in this chain of events took place. Stay with me here, because this is the hinge the entire case turns on. Everything that happens for the rest of this video traces back to what this one stranger decides to do next. If you want to see exactly how a message like this gets written, subscribe now before we get into it. Then he sent the message, worded to read as nothing more than a casual weekend invite from someone she'd never think twice about. The invite was to a party, specifically, court records show, a rap showcase at a club called Island Vibes on Antioch Pike in South Nashville. Consider what that invitation looked like from Maya's side. A club, public, loud, cameras at the entrance, security posted inside, nothing in the setting itself suggesting danger. And the message arrived from someone with no apparent link to the argument the night before. A stranger extending a casual, unremarkable weekend invite, the sort that circulates constantly among 22-year-olds on any given Saturday. Promoters send messages like it. Friends of friends send messages like it. There was nothing in its shape that should have registered as a threat because it wasn't built to. And there was time built into every step of this. That's worth holding on to longer than almost anything else in this case. This wasn't a split-second decision made in anger and regretted an hour later. Tipton had a full day to reconsider and never did. Bowles had to locate a stranger's profile, study it, compose a message, send it, and keep the exchange going long enough for her to say yes. A process with natural pauses, moments where second thoughts could have simply stopped him from typing. At every one of those steps, either of them could have walked away from it. Neither one did. The plan survived a full 24 hours of opportunities to collapse on its own, and it never did. A third person entered here, Lamyra Pipkins, 20, close with both Tipton and Bowles. She's also identified by the surname Dixon in some later filings. When the night eventually turned, she wasn't a bystander to it, and the record makes clear she'd been positioned as part of the plan well before Maya ever left her house that evening. Picture the sequence as it was actually assembled, piece by piece, over a single day, with everyone positioned before the sun went down. Tipton, the grudge still burning nearly 24 hours later, redirected fully into planning rather than cooling off. Pipkins, ready to back her up the moment things escalated. Bowles, the unfamiliar name on Maya's phone, waiting to see whether a casual-sounding text would be enough to get her there. It was enough. Maya got dressed, headed out, and drove toward Antioch Pike, toward the music, toward what she believed was simply another party on a free Saturday night, a low-stakes plan that fills a calendar without a second thought behind it. She had no way of knowing 3 people had spent the entire day arranging for her to arrive. She got to Island Vibes at approximately 11:14 p.m., a detail prosecutors were precise about, because by the time this case reached a courtroom, every minute of that night had become part of the evidence, time-stamped and cross-checked against surveillance footage and cell records. The club was loud, lit, crowded, exactly the kind of place a young woman has every reason to expect she'll be safe, with a crowd pressed around her and security stationed at the door. There was no rap showcase waiting that mattered. There was a plan already in motion, waiting for her to walk directly into the middle of it. At some point after arriving, Maya ended up outside, in the parking lot, away from the crowd and the noise and the lights that had made the place feel secure minutes earlier. Tipton was waiting. She wasn't alone. According to prosecutors, Tipton confronted her and Pipkins joined in, 2 against 1, in the dark, away from any witnesses, away from the cameras and security that had made the club itself feel like solid ground. Maya fought. She didn't go down without resisting. Reporting on the case describes her fighting back against both of them, a 22-year-old outnumbered in a parking lot, holding her ground against 2 people who'd spent the day preparing for this exact moment, while she'd spent it preparing for nothing at all. But 2 against 1, planned across an entire day in advance, only ends one way. The beating was severe, not a scuffle that spiraled, but a sustained assault. Medical examiner findings later documented injury to her ribs and her leg, along with clothing damage consistent with gunfire. Details only confirmed once her body was eventually recovered, but tracing directly back to those violent minutes in that parking lot. Minutes in which nobody intervened and nobody called for help. Whatever noise the fight made was absorbed entirely by distance and darkness, swallowed before it could reach anyone close enough to act on it. Then the trunk opened. Maya, beaten, bleeding, no longer able to stand under her own strength, was forced inside. The lid came down. Weigh the span of that single day one more time, because it's the part that makes this hardest to absorb. That morning, she had been nowhere near this. That afternoon, she had clocked out of an unremarkable shift at a stadium. That night, she had said yes to an invitation that looked like nothing at all. Now she was in the trunk of a car, and the people who had spent the day arranging this were climbing into the seats above her. Then they drove. This is the stretch of the case that resists being rushed through, and it shouldn't be, because it wasn't rushed through when it happened. Nobody hurt her and fled. That distinction matters because it separates this from a crime of pure impulse. They didn't stop nearby. They crossed out of Nashville, out of Davidson County entirely, into Wilson County. Real distance, not minutes but miles, on unlit roads, at night, with no reason to hurry because no one was coming for them. However long that drive lasted, Maya was alive for every second of it, locked in the dark, feeling every turn the car made, no way to see where she was headed, and no way to call for help, while the people responsible sat above her and kept driving, past mile markers and county lines that meant nothing to her because she couldn't see any of them. They ended up on a stretch of undeveloped property off Trammell Lane, near Lebanon, empty land, no neighbors close enough to hear anything. Chosen, prosecutors would argue, specifically for how isolated it was. They had taken her from a building full of strangers within arm's reach to a piece of ground with none of that. No witnesses, no lights, nobody to hear anything that happened next. The trunk opened again. According to the account laid out at the plea hearings, Tipton shot Maya 7 times. Investigators later recovered 7 shell casings at the scene, along with a bullet, physical evidence that corroborates the count, not just testimony describing it. 7 is not a number that happens by accident, and it isn't the count of a single panicked shot fired in a struggle. It's 7 separate decisions, each one requiring the trigger to be pulled again, in an empty field, in the dark, with no one there to stop it. When it was over, they left her there and drove back toward Nashville, back into the same city where, hours earlier, she had still been getting ready for a Saturday night. If you're still with us, drop 12 hours in the comments, because that's the number this whole case actually hinges on, and the ending is about to get a lot harder to sit with than the shooting alone. Back home, the hours passed with no word from Maya, and for a family that knew she always kept in touch, that silence became its own kind of alarm before anyone had language for what might have happened. She was reported missing. Then came a detail that made the wrongness of it impossible to explain away. Her grey 2020 Toyota Camry was found still sitting in the lot near Island Vibes, exactly where she'd left it hours before, untouched, unmoved. She never came back for it. The car was there, she wasn't. For a family piecing together her last known movements, that single fact collapsed every hopeful explanation at once. She hadn't lost track of time with someone she trusted, hadn't simply gone quiet for a day. Her car sat abandoned in a nightclub parking lot, and she was nowhere. What followed was the part of a case like this that's almost too painful to sit inside: the waiting. Days of phone calls, days of searching, flyers, a search radius that kept widening without an answer, and underneath all of it, a growing, sickening certainty that something had gone badly wrong, with nothing yet to confirm exactly what. On the 6th of August, roughly a week after she was last seen, the answer came, and it was the worst version of it. On that property off Trammell Lane, human remains were found in a wooded area, behind land still under development, discovered by chance rather than by search. A disturbance in the ground, enough to bring investigators out to a piece of property that had never been part of any search perimeter. The office of the medical examiner confirmed it was Maya. Cause of death, multiple gunshot wounds. The earliest forensic findings, released not long after her body was recovered, described her as shot at least twice, an initial count based purely on what the physical exam could establish at that point. It would take the fuller weight of the investigation, the prosecutor's account at the plea hearings, and the 7 shell casings investigators later recovered at the scene to establish what had actually happened. Not 2 shots, but 7. That's not a contradiction in the record. It's simply how a case like this comes into focus. An early, partial picture, sharpening as more evidence gets tied together. The examiner's report also described damage to her clothing consistent with gunfire, along with injury to her ribs and leg. Physical confirmation of the beating she endured before ever being placed in that trunk. None of what happened to her that night had been quick, and none of it had been merciful. Knowing how she died and proving who was responsible were 2 entirely different problems. Whoever did this had been careful, crossing county lines, choosing isolation deliberately, leaving investigators a case that would need to be assembled from scattered fragments rather than a single clean thread. Nothing about the location off Trammell Lane connected obviously back to Nashville, and that gap was, by design, the hardest part of the case for detectives to close. What followed was nearly a year of work spanning 4 counties and more than 50 law enforcement personnel, coordinated primarily through the Wilson County Sheriff's Office, alongside the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and Metro-Davidson County Police. Detective Sergeant Walker Woods, who led much of the investigation, has since described it as a heavy burden carried in service of eventually giving Maya's family answers. A case that follows the people working at home at the end of a shift. For months, there was nothing public to show for any of it. No names, no arrests, just a family waiting and a sheriff's office working leads it couldn't yet discuss. But somewhere in that silence, 3 names were already surfacing. Detectives were quietly building the case from surveillance footage pulled off businesses along Antioch Pike, cell phone data placing specific people in specific locations at specific times, and physical evidence gathered from the property off Trammell Lane. The kind of case solved not in a single afternoon, but through the accumulation of small confirmations that eventually stopped leaving room for doubt. It was tedious, unglamorous work, the sort that rarely makes it into a headline until the moment it finally produces one. A reward fund, built jointly by the sheriff's office and private donations organized through the Fuller family's attorney, eventually climbed to $21,000, offered to anyone who could help push the case forward. Almost exactly 1 year after her body was found, it paid off. Search warrants went out for multiple suspects. In the summer of 2023, 3 people were arrested: Tiana Tipton, Tyshawn Bowles, and Lamira Pipkins, all from Nashville, all charged in connection with Maya's death, all held without bond. For a case that had gone quiet in the public eye for the better part of a year, the arrests arrived without much warning to anyone outside the investigation itself, closing a silence that had stretched on for months without a single public update. For the first time in a year, Maya's family had names attached to what had been done to their daughter. Tipton and Bowles were each charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. Pipkins was charged with first-degree murder in the perpetration of a kidnapping, along with kidnapping. Investigators confirmed at the time that these 3 had known each other and known Maya for barely 24 hours before her death. Not an ongoing relationship, not people with any shared history at all. This wasn't a bond gone wrong. It was strangers, brought together for a single night, for a single purpose, then separated again by exactly what that purpose had turned out to be. All 3 appeared in Wilson County Criminal Court and pleaded not guilty at their first hearing, standing together for what would be the last time any of them faced this case as a unified front. What followed was nearly 2 years of legal proceedings, spread out one defendant at a time, trial dates set and pushed back, and each new plea reopened the case for Maya's family in a different way, pulling them back into a courtroom to hear, in granular detail, exactly what had been done to their daughter. The first plea came in the spring of 2025, nearly 3 years after Maya disappeared. Tipton was days from trial, a jury already being assembled, witnesses prepared, the full machinery of a courtroom already moving, when she stood before Judge Brody Kane in a Wilson County courtroom and entered an open guilty plea to everything: first-degree murder, kidnapping, abuse of a corpse. Prosecutors have said the plea caught them completely off guard. They'd been fully prepared to take the case in front of a jury the following week, to prove every piece of it to 12 strangers. Instead, in a single morning, it was over. Judge Kane sentenced Tipton to life for first-degree premeditated murder and a second life sentence for felony first-degree murder, sentences that would later merge into one. Maya's family sat in that courtroom, and according to reporting from that day, they agreed with the plea. For the first time since Maya disappeared, one piece of this case had been settled without a fight. The woman who put Maya in that trunk and fired 7 shots would not be walking free again. That much was no longer in question. 2 defendants remained. The second plea came that October, nearly a year and a half after Tipton's, and it landed very differently. Tyshawn Bowles, the brother who searched for Maya's profile, studied it, circulated her identity, and sent the message that pulled her out that night, did not plead guilty to murder. His trial had been scheduled to start that same week, but an agreement was reached in the days beforehand. He pleaded to a reduced charge, facilitation of especially aggravated kidnapping, a Class B felony. His sentence was 12 years, with the possibility of release after serving 30% of that time. In court, Assistant District Attorney Tammy Mead laid out more of what the evidence showed. Bowles admitted he was present. He admitted he watched the beating unfold. He admitted hearing his sister give the order to open the trunk, but claimed he never actually saw Maya placed inside the vehicle, saying he'd followed his sister's car and eventually lost sight of it in the dark. District Attorney Jason Lawson explained the reasoning plainly. Different people in the same crime carry different levels of responsibility, and the evidence showed Bowles invited Maya there, but didn't show that he intended or took part in her killing. It's a distinction the law draws carefully between arranging the circumstances that make a crime possible and carrying out the crime itself. And in Bowles's case, that distinction was the difference between a life sentence and a number with an ending built into it, one his co-defendants never received. That reasoning offered little comfort to the family. Maya's mother read a statement in that same courtroom. Reporting from the hearing indicates she made clear the family did not accept a 12-year sentence, understanding, but not accepting, how the law had arrived here, and discovering that understanding a legal process and accepting its result turned out to be two entirely separate things to carry. She had already sat through one sentencing that felt like resolution. This one, by contrast, felt like the case reopening in a direction nobody in the family had prepared for. The man whose message pulled Maya out that night could, under this sentence, walk free again before he even reaches middle age. He is the reason, by every account of how this was constructed, that Maya was anywhere near that parking lot at all, and he received the lightest sentence of the three people involved. One defendant remained. The third and final plea didn't arrive until the spring of 2026. Lamira Pipkins, also known as Dixon in some filings, held out the longest of the three, her case outlasting both co-defendants by months. The morning a jury was set to be selected for her trial, with the courtroom prepared to finally hear testimony, she entered a guilty plea too, to facilitation of first-degree murder. Her sentence in the end, 20 years in the Tennessee Department of Correction. With that, nearly 4 years after Maya disappeared from a parking lot on Antioch Pike, the case closed. 3 guilty pleas, delivered on 3 separate mornings, spread almost a year apart from each other. 3 people, answering in 3 very different measures, for one young woman's life. Now look at how the punishment actually landed, side by side, because the arithmetic here is the entire story compressed into 3 numbers, and it's worth stating plainly, rather than letting it pass by quickly. The woman who pulled the trigger, who fired 7 shots into Maya Fuller on an empty piece of land in the dark, alone, with no other hand on the gun, received life in prison. The woman who helped hold her down in that parking lot, who was present for the beating that preceded the trunk and the drive, was sentenced separately, months later, and received 20 years. And the man who found her, studied her page, circulated her identity to others, and sent the message that pulled her out that night, without whom, by every account of how this was built, none of it happens. Not the lure, not the parking lot, not the drive into Wilson County, pleaded to a lesser charge and was sentenced to 12 years, eligible for release after serving less than 4 of them. 12 years, with an exit written into the sentence itself. Life with none. The hand that struck the first match was punished the least. Closing a case isn't the same as making it right. A verdict tells you what happened and who bears responsibility for it. It doesn't tell you why. No sentence, however carefully calculated, answers the question Maya's family has carried for 4 years now. Why does a small disagreement, words exchanged on a Friday night, the kind most people forget by the weekend, end with a 22-year-old shot 7 times and abandoned on undeveloped land in a county she had no reason to ever set foot in? There isn't an answer that makes it make sense, and that isn't a failure of the investigation. It's simply the truth about a case built on something this disproportionate. The cause was small enough to be forgotten by one side within a day, and the consequence was permanent. Cases like this one don't resolve into anything tidy, no matter how thoroughly the courts work through them, because the imbalance at the center of it was never a legal question to begin with. It was a question about how quickly a grudge can become a plan, and how few chances there ever are to stop it once it starts moving. Maya Fuller wasn't a statistic, and she shouldn't be reduced to one just because her death became a case number. She was 22, a daughter her own mother has called a genius in open court, kind, close with her family, working toward a steady, unremarkable life that never makes the news, right up until it did, for the worst possible reason. She had every reason to believe a long life sat ahead of her. All of it ended over something that should have meant nothing at all, to anyone, by the next morning. If there's a warning inside her story, it's an uncomfortable one, and it isn't really about nightclubs or strangers in the abstract sense. It's about how ordinary the setup looked from the inside, start to finish, at every single point where it could have been questioned and wasn't. The invitation that ended her life didn't look dangerous. It looked like a normal Saturday night, sent by someone who seemed harmless, through a screen, with nothing in the message itself that should have raised alarm. Be careful who you trust on the other end of an unexpected message. Be careful whose invitation you accept, even when accepting it is the reasonable, unremarkable choice. And when there's bad blood with someone you barely know, even something as small as a disagreement in passing, walk away from it entirely, because you cannot know in advance what someone else is willing to do about it, or who they're willing to bring with them. If this case stayed with you, that's worth sitting with before you move on to whatever's next in your feed. Maya Fuller deserved far more than the ending she got. If you have information related to this case, you're encouraged to contact the Wilson County Sheriff's Office directly. And this case isn't fully finished. Tyshawn Bowles becomes eligible for release years before either of his co-defendants, and when that date approaches, we'll be covering it, along with anything the family or the district attorney's office has to say about it at the time. Subscribe now so you don't miss it, and if you want more cases handled with this same level of care, verified facts, no embellishment, tell us in the comments where you're watching from.